welcome to a coffee talk on funeral pre-planning. I've seen a lot of familiar face from earlier this week. But for those who do not know me, my name is Amanda Crombie, and I am a program coordinator here at Creekside Community Center. So I'm going to turn it over to Pam, who will talk about funeral pre-planning.
First of all, like Amanda said, my name is Pam Tsatsos. I work for a local funeral home here. It's Washburn-McCreevy Funeral Chapels. We own and operate about 16 locations and 4 cemeteries around the Minneapolis metropolitan area. The family, it's in their 160th year, so it's still family owned, which is really a good thing. They're in their 5th generation. I've been with them for 10 years and have been the manager of the pre-arrangement department the entire time. So talking about pre-arrangements, a little bit about me, how I got into this unique business was by default. I married my first husband, who was finishing mortuary science school in Dallas, Texas. So right after we married, we moved into a funeral home. Now, wasn't that quite a honeymoon? But anyway, I kind of, I was young at the time and never been exposed to a lot of death, so it was interesting to move into a funeral home. I worked outside of the funeral home, but I kind of helped in every facet, so I got an education, if you will. We lived there, and not just that when we moved around, but we lived in funeral homes for about 10 years before I experienced one of the closest deaths to me, and that was my grandmother. Well, my grandmother and my grandfather told my mother, who would be responsible for taking arrangements, that they had everything done. We have all the plans made. So when I went to help my mother make arrangements for my grandmother when she passed away, I think the funeral director, who knew me and who knew I had lived in a funeral home and had some experience, looked at me like I was a deer in the headlights because I couldn't answer a lot of the questions that he had. And by the way, when my grandparents said they had everything taken care of, they had their plots and their stones and no funeral arrangements. So it was very difficult for my mother to have to go in on one of the worst days of her life and make those arrangements. Fast forward 3 weeks later, my grandfather died. So I guess the only good news is we already had a little bit of experience, but we had to do it again. And you know, as I look back, there's so many things that didn't reflect who my grandparents were. My grandfather was a woodworker, and we picked out a metal casket because it was blue. I still think he should have had a wooden casket. My grandmother, we picked her casket based on what matched her dress. So there wasn't a lot of time, and there wasn't a lot of thought that could be put into those decisions. You know, they say that when a death occurs and you have to make arrangements, there are anywhere from 95 plus decisions that need to be made, and they have to be made pretty soon. You walk in and things have to get going, right? You have to plan for that service, and you have to make decisions. You have to get the obituary in. You have to get the church, if that's the church, you have to get that coordinated, music, all of that, and it's done in a very short time. In fact, a lot of the same elements that go into planning a wedding go into planning a funeral. And so, you know, you can take up to 9 months, a year to plan a wedding, but a funeral, and you only have a couple days. So that's what we're here today to help you get started with. First of all, I'm going to get a little bit of interaction from you because I don't like to just sit and talk. I like to have you participate a little bit. So how many of you have had to make funeral arrangements for a loved one?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
Your mother.
So most of you actually have had that experience, right? How many of you have made plans for yourself? Raise your hand.
Some.
Okay, congratulations to those of you that have. So what we're here today is I want to talk to you because a lot of you have already had some experience with having to make those plans. And we say people come into the funeral home one of two ways. Either you're prepared or you're unprepared. And prepared means somebody took the time to make the plans ahead of time and pick and choose all of those elements. And unprepared, obviously, is there's nothing that's been done, and you have to make those decisions. So for those of you that have made funeral arrangements for somebody else, what decisions did you have to make?
First off,
Headstone.
casket.
Headstone. I heard somebody say casket over here.
History
Cemetery.
of the person.
Church.
We'll say vitals here with history.
Church.
Church.
Cemetery. Music.
Cemetery, flowers. Flowers.
My quartet.
You guys are quick. Music, right?
Yeah.
Obituary. Pardon me? Where it's going to be. What else?
Food.
We're Minnesotans. We like to make sure we have the food picked out.
Who's going to give the eulogy? Who's going to give the
Eulogy.
Yeah,
If
And
they're
maybe-
going to be cremated or not.
That's a big decision. Cremation or traditional, we'll say. Okay,
What to do with the ashes?
what to do with the ashes?
What are they going to wear?
Clothing. Well, you guys have had a lot of experience. Thank you for your participation. I want to take a minute and just look at this. It's not that I'm a messy writer necessarily, but how does that make you feel? Confused? Overwhelmed? Very overwhelmed. That's what it feels like to come in on the worst day of your life and have to make arrangements for somebody that hasn't taken the time to make them themselves. Now, if you do make your arrangements ahead of time, your family is left with these two decisions, right? And I'm simplifying, but basically, if you've made all those choices, they really just have to do a little bit to enhance that service. It might be putting photo boards together or putting a video together, getting together and just being together, right? This is not how you want to leave your family on the worst day of their life. And there's one thing that didn't get mentioned. That's how are you going to pay for it? Funerals today, unlike years ago, are due. The payment is due when you make arrangements. It's the world we live in. It's when you go to the doctor or the dentist or anything else. Payment is due at the time. And it's not always easy for people to have to write a check for whatever amount and pay for that. So that's another advantage of taking care of things ahead of time. You have options. You have options for payment plans, or paying it all at once, or paying it a little at a time. So what I want to do today is to help you get started on a plan. You have a little tool in your packet. It looks like this. You each should have one. And this is just a little planning guide to help you organize everything that's necessary to plan your funeral. This is designed to save your family time, money, and hardship when your death occurs. I'm going to go through the first bit of the book, and it's just a little bit of information. The first is a verse. We shape our lives not by what we carry with us, but by what we leave behind. This says that we plan for everything else in life. We plan for our education, births, retirement, vacations. And it only makes sense to plan for your final event, your funeral. The next page is a few statistics. It says, because no one is promised tomorrow, in the US, a baby's born every 12 seconds. That's a happy thought. And a death occurs every 8 seconds. Of all US deaths, 1 in 4 occur in people under age 50. Does that apply to anybody here? I thought that was staggering. And 3 out of 5 funerals that Washburn-McCreevy does handle are prepaid and prearranged. So it's not a new thing. A lot of people have done this for a while. You know, at the time when you have to make decisions for planning a funeral, these are some of the things that you would experience. There's something called emotional overspending. Does anybody know what that is? So emotional overspending is when nothing is too good for your loved one. So if things have not been planned and you walk in and you think, Mom needs the best casket, or Mom needs the best vault, we need to get the best flowers. By you taking the time to make those decisions, it takes that away. They'll respect what you want, your wishes. There's hasty decisions, as we talked about. You have to make those decisions right now. Sometimes people are alone, stressed, confused. Maybe they've been in a hospital for the last, 3 nights just at a bedside. So, there's a lot of things that, and emotions that you can be feeling at that time. This is just showing a sample of what funeral costs do over time. Funerals go up like everything else, so they increase in cost. They say a funeral doubles every 10 to 15 years in cost. And some of you that maybe had to make arrangements maybe 5 or 10 years ago and now see what funerals cost will realize that. So we'll talk a little bit about the benefit of prepaying at today's prices and receiving a guarantee. A guarantee simply means, and this is something that it's up to the funeral home whether they offer it or not. But a price guarantee simply means that once you've paid for your arrangements, your family is not responsible to pay any more for those same arrangements and merchandise like a casket or an urn or a vault, no matter how much our prices go up. Now, I had a question earlier about, gosh, we did this and we had to pay more at the time. Well, first of all, if there's a guarantee, it just simply means it's the funeral home's costs. So we also go over things like, we call them third-party items, the obituary, any honorariums, luncheons, cemetery costs. Those are not within the guarantee, but you can put those monies aside, and that can be paid out to those individuals when you pass away. And sometimes, if it's been a length of time, those things go up quite a bit. Specifically cemetery opening and closing and obituary. And so as those things go up, if it's 10 or 20 years, that can be a significant amount. The other way you would have to pay any more is if you change your mind and maybe the family wants to upgrade and get a different plan. And they just use the money that you put aside as a credit, and then the family would pay the difference. But that's really the only way that you would have to pay more. If the funeral home offers a guarantee, they have to honor it. Now, some people are confused how that works, and really, our prices continue to go up, and the money is invested in an irrevocable trust, an insurance policy that earns growth over time. And the funeral home is banking on the fact that the growth will keep up. But you know what interest rates have done in the last 10 years, not the greatest, right? So it doesn't matter what that growth is, the funeral home still has to provide what they promised you. If for some reason the growth would go back to what it was in the 80s and high interest rates, and there's more money in the account, then that money is given back to the family. But the growth in the money in the account is used to offset the increase in the funeral expense. So if there's not enough, that's okay. Your family still doesn't have to pay more. If there would have to be more, then the family gets it back. Okay? This is a picture of an ambulance at the back of a hospital, and it says, now is not the time that you want to plan. You know, we often get calls from people, and they say, you know, my husband is just going into hospice. We have to make a plan. And we can help people with that, of course. But again, that is not the best time to plan. I've been in that situation where my grandmother was imminent. She had cancer, and it was just sort of hard to talk about that. You didn't want to bring it up and make it sound like you'd lost hope. So you really want to talk about these things. When you're in good health, you can make wise decisions. You can make your own decisions. This is just a little letter that is meant to give to your loved ones when receiving this book. And it says, excuse me, to my loved ones, I have prepared this keepsake for you and those I care about. As my survivors, you will be faced with many decisions in a short time. I have recorded information that I hope will relieve you as much anxiety, grief, and expense as possible at the time of my passing. You will find a listing of my family and friends, a brief overview of my life, and my personal memories. This information should aid in the preparation of any obituary or eulogy or other remembrances and serve as a record for family genealogy and history. My vital statistics, personal information, choices for funeral services, cemetery preferences, and other information are included to help you in planning the details of my service. I have indicated my wishes for your peace of mind as well as my own. By honoring these wishes, thoughts, and memories, you will be able to celebrate our time together, leaving you with an unforgettable impression of my life. And then you'll want to sign this. So this is a little homework for you. I think that if you can write it in your own handwriting, it's even more special. If any of you have ever experienced somebody close to you that's passed away and then later found a card with their handwriting, it's so touching. It happened to me. My dad died 3 years ago, and shortly after that I found this beautiful card, and it touched me. I have a coworker that has a really neat bracelet. Her daughter gave it to her for Mother's Day last year, and it's actually her own mother's handwriting that says, I love you, and it's on her bracelet. The first part to get started is your personal information or vital statistics. This information is necessary to file a death certificate. Any of you that had to deal with collecting monies and getting death certificates know how important it is. You can't collect hardly anything in way of benefits unless you have a death certificate. So we want to make sure that this information is accurate. As I told you, when I went in with my mother to make the arrangements, I couldn't remember my grandmother's mother's maiden name. And it's those little details that can be confusing. Right now you know that information. You know yourself better than anybody else. So you can put that information down and it can be accurate. You can record information about your education, your marital status, your medical history. The next page is information you can record for your military information. Are there any veterans in the room? Quite a few. Wow. First of all, thank you for your service. I truly appreciate my freedom. And with Memorial Day coming up, it's a grand way to celebrate all of your service. But we help people with getting those papers in order. So whether you want to use Fort Snelling as your final resting place, or you just want certain military honors at your service, we can help you to get that all organized. One of the things that we'll do is collect your separation papers or your DD-214 papers and just get a copy right in the file so that when it comes time to file for veteran benefits, we have the information that we need. There is a website. If you do not know where your separation papers are, it's called dd214.com. So they have a lot of information as to how to obtain those documents if you need to. This next section is how do you want to be remembered? That's where we get into the details of your service. Every one of you is unique. It's not like it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago where everybody's funeral looked the same. These are unique. Just like weddings, again, they're all different. They're all very unique. And really, you can have it the way you want it. There's no real rules other than, you don't want to break the law or anything. But really, there's some really unique funerals. My father was cremated, and we had a beautiful service for him. He loved his Irish heritage, so when people came in, they had a little shamrock sticker that they put on their lapel. They wrote a little message in a memory book. The service itself had a video of all his favorite music, which included like Otis Redding and non-traditional type music. And at the end, my uncle, his brother, who gave the eulogy, said that was the best funeral ever. And it was not anything grand. It was considered simple, but it was really perfect for who he was. That's what we want to create. We want this to be unique to you. Now, selfishly, this isn't really for you, it's for your family. So when you think of that, I often sit down with couples, and the man will say, well, I don't care, just roll me in a sheet and throw me in the ditch. And even though the wife might be going, yeah, let's do that, really, your children or your people that are left behind are the people that are going to be needing that gathering, that time for people to come together and share stories and talk about you. So think about that. You can pick out your own pallbearers. I would pencil them in because sometimes things change over time and people pass away before you expect them to. You can pick out your clothing if you want. You can decide whether you want your glasses on or off, whether you want an open casket or a closed casket, whether you want a viewing, whether you want a simple viewing with just your private family. The next page is a place for you to record your obituary. This fall, we're actually going to be having an obituary workshop because I think it's something, and it was hard for me when my dad died to come up with the obituary. We hadn't done that ahead of time, and so going back, oh, what years did he do this, and what time did this happen, and what was important? So write down those details. If you're not a writer and you think, I don't want to be all flowery, just write down pertinent information that would be helpful in the obituary. And by the way, the obituary is pretty expensive these days. If you look in the paper, it's about $10.95 a line. And so when you look at an obituary that's about like this, you're talking over thousands of dollars. And I think we're all in Minnesota. Do you all know who Ole and Lena are? Yeah. Yeah, did you know poor Ole died? Yeah, he did. And poor Lena, she had to go in and talk to that funeral director. And she had to make all these overwhelming decisions. And so the funeral director said, Lena, that obituary is pretty expensive, but you get 5 free words. So Lena said, okay, put Ole died. And the funeral director said, well, Lena, say a little bit, something nice about Ole. You have 3 more words. She says, okay, Ole died, boat for sale. She maximized that opportunity. The next page is just for you to record a little bit of an abbreviated family tree. You're not going to get into a lot of detail, but did you know the second most Googled thing on the internet is genealogy? My daughter just did the DNA test. Did anybody do that? It's really interesting, and she is pretty much what we thought she was, which was good, but it can surprise you, but it was really fascinating. And they give you this whole report, and they have photos even. So they've collected photos from your family over the years. It's super interesting.
Is that accurate?
Pardon me?
Is it accurate?
It was when she showed me like some of my grandmother's mother and father and where they came from, and even photos, and I remember the photos of my great-grandmother. So it is pretty accurate. So it's very interesting if you haven't looked into it. The next few pages are just areas. It says your children, your friends and relatives, your siblings, others whom I cherish. This is just a list of people that you would want notified when you pass away. I think we've all experienced a time when someone has passed away and we didn't know about it and maybe didn't find out about it for a long time. And we felt really bad. And that happens more than it should. But you know, when you're going through that time, there's so much going on. So if you can make a list, and you know, most people will know your immediate family, but it's your friends. It's the people that you socialize with. My kids know a lot of my friends' first names, but I don't know that they'd know how to get a hold of them or their last name. With social media now, that has really helped things with Facebook and being able to put information out. That certainly does help. But you want to make sure you record the people that are important to you that you want notified. The next page is just for you to record important documents. Now, every year, there are millions of dollars lost in benefits because people don't know about them, or they don't have the proper information to collect them. So you don't need to put sensitive information like account numbers or anything like that, but you do want to put what you have. Do you have a will? What attorney do you use? Do you have an IRA? Do you have a 401k? So that your family, you know, a lot of you I see, or there's couples in here, you guys know what each other has, but if something tragic happened and you both passed away suddenly, your kids may not know how to get that information. So record it. If it's not here, put it on, you know, on the computer or someplace. And then the last couple pages, 17 and 18, are my favorites. It's personal remembrances of my life with you and a few of my favorite things. So these are memories on this side. You know, what was your favorite childhood memory? What, you know, what, if you could live your life over again, what would you do? My mother is living. She's got end-stage COPD, and it's been really difficult. And even though I've done this for many years, and we went through the story I told you, it's not something that really anybody wanted to talk about. And it really isn't. Sometimes when you go to a funeral, you come home and you say, oh, we've got to get this stuff in order. And that's, you know, you feel it because you see what just happened. And then that kind of wanes and the urgency goes away and you go on and you're still living, so that's all right. But you do want to take some time and put some of this information down. It was wonderful. I went to talk with my mother and I had my book, and she was more than willing to talk about it. My sister, however, didn't want to talk about it. Well, do you have to do that now? Well, do we want to do it after she dies? Yeah. And, you know, she said, oh, she'll just, because I do this, she'll be fine with whatever you do. But I'm not. I want to know who she, you know, what was special to her. The other thing is your favorite things, like your favorite flower, your favorite music, your favorite scripture. That all helps in creating that wonderful celebration of your life. I know my mom's favorite flower is a daisy, so that will definitely be part of her service. I know her favorite hymns. I knew she loved gospel music, but I didn't know which one specifically spoke more to her. I have that now. So I'm so happy that I did that. And the last page is just for you if you want certain photos or certain mementos that you want to add, you can stick them there. The back of the book says, like the golden sun that warms everything in its path, kindred hearts warm our souls. So this is your homework. It is not meant to go home and just fill it out cover to cover. These take some thought. So you might put it by your bedside. You might just go back to it. You might talk with each other and be surprised at what you might find out. But whatever you do, take the first step to record this. Your family will greatly appreciate it. There's never been anybody that came into the funeral home and said, gee, I'm so mad that my parents prearranged their funerals. They are so thankful, and that's why we call it a gift of love, because it is your final gift of love to your family to take that burden off them, both emotionally and financially. You can't take the hurt away, of course, but all that other stuff is stuff that is really unnecessary, and that time is really meant to be spent with family members and friends and people that can support one another. There are a couple reasons. You can look in here. There's all kinds of literature But the number one reason that people do that, it's on the back of this sheet, and there's just really 7 substantial benefits. And peace of mind, knowing that your arrangements are taken care of and they're tucked away, and your family doesn't have to worry about that. Number 2 is dignity and control. You get to make the decisions. You pick out the type of merchandise. You pick out whether you want to be cremated or not. Inflation-proof guarantee, we talked about that a little bit. Once you pay for your arrangements ahead of time, the funeral services and merchandise are guaranteed. It's easy to do. If you have a preference for a funeral home, call them. They will gladly sit down with you at no cost and help you create a plan. And it's really painless. It probably takes about 30 minutes, and it gets you thinking, and it gets you thinking about what you really truly want to do. And it's something, again, you might have to keep going back to. The safety is, as I said, the money is placed in an insurance policy in an irrevocable trust. And we're lucky in Minnesota. We are a very consumer-friendly state, so we are governed on the funeral home side by the Federal Trade Commission, and then on the pre-arrangement side, where we're using insurance policies, the Department of Commerce. And they say that once you pay for your funeral, you're not going to pay the funeral home because we want to make sure that money is going to be there. So that money is put into an outside policy, and it's going to be there because it's put into an irrevocable trust. It can't be cashed in by anybody. Even if you have to go on medical assistance in a nursing home, this money is protected because it is properly structured with medical assistance guidelines. And then there is no probate or delay. When the death occurs, the funeral home simply puts a claim in for the funds to be paid directly. So if you remember, I said a while ago when you have to sit down and make arrangements and it has to be paid for, if there's been arrangements made and the policy is in place, the family does not have to worry about it. The funeral home takes care of that, and they can help take care of paying those third-party people as well. I want to talk just a little bit about cremation. Anybody interested in using cremation as a final disposition? A couple of you. So with cremation, you want to think about that, because I often hear people say, I just want to be cremated. Well, cremation is really a form of final disposition, just like embalming and burying a body is. So with cremation, there's so many more decisions. You have a little pamphlet in your packet that gives you a quick overview. But with cremation, you can have a traditional service with a casket, a visitation, a viewing, and then instead of going to the cemetery after the service, you're taken to the crematory. So that's one way. Some people choose that. Others choose a cremation to take place first, and then have an urn at the church in a memorial service or at a chapel. And with that, you can have a viewing. You can have your family come and have a private viewing, so there's a time to say goodbye. Sometimes we don't know if that's going to be necessary. I'll give you 2 scenarios. When my father-in-law died 4 years ago, he had been ill. We knew he was dying. He was in the hospital. We went to see him every day. The day that he died, we had just been up to see him. So we were called back to the hospital to say our goodbyes. None of our family felt that we needed that private viewing because we kind of had that in the hospital. But fast forward 1 year later to the day my dad died. And he died in South Dakota. He died the end of February, and I had last seen him at Christmas. So it was sudden, and we had an opportunity to have a private viewing before the cremation, and I was extremely thankful. That meant so much to my family. So you just don't know what the circumstances are going to be. So if you think you have family that lives away, it might be something you want to plan for. And if they decide at the time it's not necessary, then they don't have to do that. You can also have your cremation take place when you want it. Your memorial service can be whenever you would like. One thing I say about cremation is that it affords you flexibility. You don't have to make those decisions in 2 or 3 days. That can be made over time. In fact, when my dad passed away, I think we had his service about a month later. We had his burial in June. I will say it also promotes procrastination. So have a plan, especially when it comes to what are you going to do with the ashes. I have this conversation sometimes with people and they say, well, I think I'll just give them to my daughter. Well, Merry Christmas. What is she going to do with that? You know, are we going to hand these down? So do your family a favor and think that through all the way to the end. There's a lot of options. There's cemetery options. You can have the urn buried in the ground. You can have the urn in a niche, which is above ground. There's scattering gardens, something called an ossuary. There's also scattering in other places. So think about what you're going to do. Don't let that piece just hang out there. Yes, Amanda?
Is it true that there's different methods of cremation, and what are they, and what's the cost? Or
There are a couple different, there's a newer one. We all know the cremation by high heat, right? That's kind of what we think of. There is also a cremation process that uses a chemical to sort of dissolve everything, and it's a water base, so it doesn't go into the air necessarily. There is only one funeral home that I'm aware of that offers that. Don't have a lot of information about it, but basically you get back the same thing. With cremation, basically, it's really the calcification, the bones that are left, and that's put through a pulverizing process, and that's really what you get back. And it's very similar to the water-based cremation. And as far as cost, I am not 100% sure about the water-based. I think it might be a little bit more expensive, but if you look at a simple cremation where there's no service, it's about $1,700 across the board. It could be a little bit more or less. So does that answer your question, Amanda? Okay. And then, as I talked about, you have the option to have a simple cremation where there are no services. I would think about that, though, and make sure you still have a plan. Your family deserves that time. I have a girlfriend who I grew up with, and I loved her mother dearly, and I didn't find out till that her mother passed away, till again, probably a month or so later. Never had anything, never had a celebration of life. And to this day, and that was probably about 6 years ago, my friend still has a really hard time. If you don't have a service, you're still going to get one, because every time your family member goes to the grocery store, or every time they go to, out getting gas or whatever, and they run into somebody, you tell the story again and again and again. People want that opportunity. They're declaring today Prince Day, right? So think back a year ago, he had nothing in place, not just his estate, but even his funeral. And people just wanted to be there. They wanted a place to go to mourn. So they just showed up at his Paisley Park and did their own thing. And people need that. It's not just you and your family. You affect more people than you know. And that opportunity to have a service, however that looks, is so important for the healing process. We believe there are 3 essential elements. One is a gathering for you to open it up to the public and have people to come and give love and support, share stories. The service to reflect upon a life that's been lived. And then a procession to a final resting place. And as I said, that can look different for everybody. It could be the cemetery, it could be your lake home, it could be another place. But those are 3 elements that we feel are very essential in helping aid the healing process. We have gone over a lot of information. I did initially have some questions up here. I'm going to make sure we've kind of covered all of that. What's involved in making a funeral plan? Basically, you just contact your funeral home of choice. Most have somebody on staff that can help you sit down, create a plan. There is no cost involved They do that as a service. How much does a funeral cost? Does anybody want to know that? So again, compared to weddings, it's kind of like saying how much does a wedding cost? But typically when you average highs and lows, a funeral can be anywhere from $16,000 down to $1,695, $1,695. And it really all depends on what elements you're choosing and what's involved. So that's, again, why it's important to sit down with somebody and create your own plan. You will know exactly how much your service will be if you do that. We kind of covered that. If you choose cremation, you can still have a traditional look, viewing, visitation. Do I have to contact a cremation society if I choose cremation? The answer is no. Most funeral providers now offer cremation. They're full service. We own and operate all of our own crematories, so once a loved one comes into our care, they never leave our care. So those are kind of important questions to ask when you're doing your research. What if I create a plan and I pay for it and then I decide to move to Florida and retire? What happens is this money that's set aside is yours, and it's used to pay for your funeral at your choice of provider. We have to write in the policy the first beneficiary is to any funeral home as your interest appears. So if you move to Florida, you decide to retire and pass away down there and have everything there, that money is just transferred. The guarantee doesn't transfer because the guarantee is offered through our funeral home, but 100% of the money plus any growth is yours. And that's not the case in all states, I'll tell you. In California, I've had people transfer in. They maybe paid $1,000 for a simple cremation 20 years ago, and that maybe has grown quite a bit, but that's all they get. So it's unfortunate. Again, Minnesota really looks out for their consumers. Can I change my plan? You know, if you make your plan now, things change over time, right? And the answer is yes. What I recommend is once you put a plan together, revisit it every 5 years. Things change. It might not be how you remembered it. Refresh your memory. If you want to make changes, we can do that and record those in a confidential file that's held at the funeral home. Are there any other questions that I didn't go over that you would like answered today?
What if you want to go ahead and talk with somebody? The sheet of paper that I'm looking at, it says schedule a free education talk at your church or organization. I don't want to do either one.
You can just cross that out. So we'll use those. Actually, I have a couple door prizes, so we'll just use that. We have a survey in there, and I do like your feedback, so I will ask that you'll complete the survey, and then if you would like more information or you would like somebody to contact you, then indicate that. Otherwise, I'll have you just register with those slips for the door prize. Yes, sir.
I have a question about veterans.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading about the veterans benefits, and it says that if you use a private cemetery, a grave marker could be paid for the veterans.
That is correct. So
I
you were
already
in.
paid for mine.
Oh, sorry. So veterans benefits, yes, you can still use a private cemetery and you still get a marker, you get a flag, you're entitled to military rights and honors.
There's no monetary benefit?
No, you don't, it's kind of use it or lose it. If you need it, they give it to you, but you don't get a credit for that per se.
Okay.
Okay?
Don't they pay so much towards the funeral, like 200 or whatever?
So there's veterans benefits and there's Social Security benefits. As far as veteran benefits, the funeral home applies for any that you may qualify for. For Social Security benefits, there is one-time death benefit paid to a surviving spouse. So that means if you're a couple and one of you pass away, they're going to pay $255 to the survivor, which might pay for a short obituary. When the second person passes away, they don't pay anything. And unfortunately, if you're a single person, they won't pay anything either. It's only paid to a surviving spouse or a dependent disabled child. Yes, ma'am.
You had mentioned earlier about keeping information on a computer. I would just maybe suggest that somewhere that has password be kept so that people can, a survivor can get into that computer? And maybe even if there's Facebook pages you want to shut down, maybe passwords and instructions on that.
So good point. She mentioned that if you put information on the computer, especially important information, make sure people have what they need to get access to it in way of passwords. Social media is the same way, and I know that's something that's pretty new. I'm not an expert on that, so I can't speak to that, but that's a good point. Make sure that people have access to it. Years ago, they used to have safe deposit boxes, and maybe some of you still have a safe deposit box, but we would say, don't put this in a safe deposit box. You want access to this information right away. And did somebody else have a question back here? Yes.
On the veterans benefits, does that also include the wife, or is it just for the veteran?
Well, the wife has some benefits as well. So if the husband, if you decide to go to Fort Snelling, for instance, you both get a grave space, you both get a marker, a grave liner, the flag for the veteran. So there are some benefits, and that can be a pretty significant savings. It's probably about a $3,000 or $4,000 savings when you look at that. Good question. We are going to have at our Nokomis Park location in May a seminar that addresses veterans benefits and funeral pre-planning. And you can find that information on our website, and it's Washburn-McCreavy, MCREAVY.com. We have all of our community events on there, since I've had so many questions about veterans benefits. Any other questions before we close?
If you do want a meeting, do you have to go to the one down on DuPont, or can you go to the one in Bloomington?
Good question. We have 16 locations. You can go to any of the locations. If you'd prefer to have somebody come to your home, they can do that as well. So whatever's most comfortable for you. It's nice to go to the funeral chapel if it's going to be one that you think you might be using. You can look at the space. You can look at caskets or urns or that sort of thing. So, good question. Yes, sir.
So you can pick and choose. Let's say we go to you and we can pick and choose what we want. For example, the type of casket, rental casket, all. We can pick and choose those things.
Yes.
And then we can eliminate certain things if we want to.
That's a good question as well. So what he mentioned is you can pick and choose what you want. And that's exactly what happens when you meet with a pre-arrangement specialist. They go through everything, all of your out-of-pocket expenses, even those cemetery, newspaper costs, everything. So you have a total itemization of what that looks like. And again, if you say, maybe I don't want this and I do want that, you can have that choice. And some of it may be just that you put it on paper and you decide to pay for just certain things, maybe just the guaranteed items, and then maybe revisit it and pay more. So you have a lot of options in way of putting your plan together and paying for it. Yes, ma'am.
Are there options for cemeteries as far as the green cemeteries versus a regular, normal, embalmed cemetery? I'm just curious what options.
Have you been to a cemetery lately? Is there anything greener than a cemetery? I'm just kidding. We do have the green, and it's more environmental friendly. There are some, I know of at least one, I think it's Mendota Heights. It's not one that we own, but there are those green cemeteries available. We also do offer merchandise that's conducive to green burial, and that would be, we have a natural casket that has a straw in the inside, and then it can be placed in the ground. On that, I want to say one of the common questions is, is it a state law that I need a vault at a cemetery? It is not. Those are cemetery rules and regulations, and the reason that most cemeteries today require a vault is because of the integrity of the cemetery. If you did not have something to support the ground, you're going to have a lot of sinking graves. And if you go to old church cemeteries, you'll see what that looks like. So that's really the only reason, the biggest reason, I will say, that they require that. A minimum is a concrete grave liner. It doesn't seal. But one way that you can get around, some people want to use maybe a private cemetery but want more of a green burial, they can actually take the grave liner and turn it upside down, so you're actually, that natural casket is right next to the ground, and it just dissolves that way.
Can I make an announcement?
Yes.
I have 3 plots available at Crystal Lake Cemetery, which is one of the ones listed here. So If anybody's interested, I
If I want to go to Iowa, I got 2.
Okay. Do I hear 4? Okay, any other questions?
The only thing that I'd like to say is you should really plan ahead because I have 2 daughters and one of my songs that I hate is I'll Fly Away. And they've already promised me that they're gonna have an angel there and if it's over, I'm gonna go.
Okay. Well, yes, ma'am.
Out at Fort Snelling, they have concrete, they put the casket in the concrete thing, right?
Mm-hmm. They provide.
Is that sealed?
No, they provide the free, I guess the thing that Fort Snelling provides at no cost to you is a grave liner. Again, it's because they want to protect the cemetery. You have the option to upgrade to a vault, and Fort Snelling or the government will give you a credit toward that vault purchase. But
What's the liner like?
it is a 2-piece concrete box, and it has holes in the bottom. It allows water to come in and out just because then it helps to keep the grave liner from cracking and breaking. And then it has the lid that just sets on top. And so that's another thing when you look at your options, you want to know, an education about the merchandise that you're getting.
I knew it had a lid to it, but I thought it was completely sealed.
No, it's not. But they do offer that at no charge. That's part of the benefit. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here.
I just want to thank Pam for coming today. And just so you know, she does represent Washburn-McGreevy, but the city of Bloomington does not endorse Washburn-McGreevy. She's here for an educational talk. Please do your research in regards to that.